Vanakkam, Namaste, Namaskaram. Thank you very much for this opportunity, Midlands Hindu Society. I actually met Midlands Hindu Society when they accommodated us in Pietermaritzburg when I was a part of a walk from Durban to Pretoria. So I know firsthand that the Midlands Hindu Society contributes definitely to social upliftment and development. And it is then it takes very little for me to say that I'm deeply honored for this opportunity. So to actually delve straight into what I'll be talking in today, I thought it necessary to actually begin with a few definitions. I'm not a priest, and that is not an aspiration of mine. So I'm actually an academic. And so you will hear me along my little presentation that I refer to different sources or individuals. So if you would like to view these sources and things like that, then you can just send me a message via the Midlands Hindu Society and I can send you the resources that I used. So to begin firstly with Hinduism, the term Hinduism, according to Ramsey and Tamsin, I'd actually like to read it. It says that the term Hinduism is highly problematic. Hinduism is a hugely diverse tradition reflecting the geographical and cultural diversity of the Indian subcontinent. And so the label is actually artificial and overly simplistic. So what we see with Hinduism is that historically it was actually a term to refer to the people that lived along the Sindhu River. So it referred more to the culture, to the religion, and to the people that lived along this river that was situated in modern day Pakistan. And over time, the word Hinduism then began to simply refer to a plethora of religious beliefs that came or stemmed from India. And these religious beliefs, I think the three most popular will be Shaivism, Shaktiism, and Vaishnavism. And there are many different traditions in Hinduism that I'm sure you are all well acquainted with. But the sort of unanimous agreement amongst this tradition is that the Vedas, the Upanishads, and the Brahma Sutras, amongst other texts, are the foundational texts of Hinduism. And so every other text finds its or establishes its authority based off the teachings of the Vedas and so on. And the nice thing I like about Hinduism and that I always mention is the Vedartha Samgraha of Sri Ramanujacharya. And in the Vedartha Samgraha, Ramanuja mentions that Brahman is one, but he comes to the earth in many different forms to do good for the world. And so it teaches that in different cultures, in different societies, in different places of the world, God comes there in these different forms for those people to understand. And it's very beautiful because it then allows for this plurality and allows for self-exploration within Hinduism. And so you'll even find that Hindu texts and Hindu philosophy and Hindu teachings are not solely for Hindus. They're actually for anyone, irrespective of wherever they may come from, that is on a path of enlightenment and a spiritual journey. Social justice, just very briefly and quickly, is just the distribution of wealth, opportunities, and privileges within a society. It is also moving in alignment with what a particular society might define as fairness. Social responsibility is then the individual duty to act in the best interests of the environment and society as a whole. And very interesting that when I think of social responsibility, I always think of in the Bhagavad Gita, when Sri Krishna speaks to Arjuna and he says that you must always perform your duty. And later on, and as you read the Bhagavad Gita, and if you focus specifically on duty and performing one's duty, you see that one's duty as such is described as an ordained a order or a task that is given by the divine, that is given by God. And because it is an ordained duty, it is virtuous, it is righteous, and it is in alignment with the Vedas. So performing your duty, performing your social responsibility is actually performing the task that God has given to you. And I think it's very beautiful to actually think of social responsibility in that manner. in light of talking of Hinduism, social justice and social responsibility, I think if I don't mention it, one of you might actually ask about the caste system. And so just to very quickly talk about it, in the South African context, the caste system is actually not evident. And a lot of the time you'll find that Western traditions or other religions have simplified Hinduism in the sense whenever a person thinks of Hinduism, they immediately refer to the caste system. And so they have projected Hinduism as totally being the caste system, when the caste system is more of a social construct that then used and manipulated religion in many ways to endorse itself. And a very nice aspect of addressing the caste system was done by Jay Lakhani, Sri Jay Lakhani in Britain, when he was discussing the caste system amongst Indian and Hindu communities in Britain. And he was asked if Indians or Hindus in Britain still practice or endorse the caste system. And he said, no, amongst the Hindu community in Britain, you will never find the caste system practiced. But if you do want to see the caste system being practiced in Britain, then go to Buckingham Palace, where you will see a person who by virtue of birth is then made the head of the state, the head of the country, the head of the government. And that is the caste system, a social construct that exists in every community. And so it should not be used to actually define Hinduism or be used in reflection of what Hinduism might, or the Hindu take of social responsibility or social justice. To narrow down then onto Hindu texts, I refer to the former president of India, Abdul Kalam, at a speech that he addressed the United Nations. And he said a very famous Tamil quote, so to say, and it says, Yadam Vore Yavaram Kelir. The world is my family, everyone is my kin, and all places are my places. And this resonates with another very famous and coveted statement in Hinduism, Vasudeva Kutumbakam, the world is one big family. To add to this, in the Bhagavad Gita in chapter 9, verse 29, it says that God is equal to all living beings. He is neither or not he, but God, in a gender neutral sense, is neither inimical or partial to any living being or any living entity. So when we look then at Hinduism, it is not in any way or it does not give any teaching that is then divisive. And so in terms of social duties, Hinduism divides into three sections. There is ashrama dharma, which is your self-development. And so that relates to artha, kama, dharma, and moksha. Then there is your varna dharma, which is your prescribed duty. And your prescribed duty is based on your age or based on your qualification. If you are qualified as a teacher, then your varna dharma will be to be a teacher at a school. And then you have your sadharana dharma, which is also prescribed duty, but outside of varna dharma. And so outside of being a teacher, what duties do you have that contribute to social upliftment and social development? Another famous or a popular saying from the Srimad Bhagavata, Book 1, Discourse 3, Part 5, it says that this form, being the form of God, is the source and indestructible seed of multifarious incarnations within the universe. And from the particle and portion of this form, different living entities like demigods, animals, human beings, and others are created. And so it asserts very similar to what Sri Shankaracharya proposed in his Advaita Vedanta, that there is only one reality, there is only one being, and that is Brahman, and nothing other than Brahman exists. And you attain moksha and you attain salvation when you realize that you are Brahman and that everything around you is equal to you, one with you, and it is all Brahman. And this understanding and this approach of being one with everything, of being equal with everything, has actually allowed many Hindu scholars to reflect on the stance of Hinduism in promoting rights or activism for the natural environment, for animals, for plant life, to address pollution, and so on and so forth. And so you even see that these scholars then say that Hinduism aligns itself with the United Nations SDGs, or Sustainable Development Goals, for natural and communal upliftment. To sort of summarize, because hopefully by now you obviously see and are aware that Hinduism has a very supporting stance when it comes to social justice and addressing needs within the community. But if for some reason it is not clear, I then refer to a local giant in the Hindu South African community, Professor Bridge Maharaj, in a paper he published in 2013 called The Challenges Facing Hindus and Hinduism in Post-Apartheid South Africa. And he says that all Hindu scriptures compel all Hindus to engage in some form of charity and social upliftment according to ability, selflessly, without any expectation of reward. And then he mentions Nishkam Karma, which is then Nishkam Karma being coincidentally my title for my PhD research. Professor Bridge then goes further to mention that in this compulsion to social upliftment, some may give in terms of money, some may give in terms of support, and some may even give in terms of labor to what is then worthy causes. So we see then that there is this general sense amongst all Hindu texts that promote people, that inspire and motivate people, even maybe even morally and ethically obligate people to perform acts that contribute to social upliftment. So then what is the role of the youth in light of this, especially when we reflect on the past week and June 16? In 2019, I was the chairperson of the Hindu Society at the University of Pretoria, and I've actually served on the SRC as well, also in 2019, and on a variety of different student leadership platforms at the University of Pretoria. And when it comes to elections, for example, the SRC, which is probably the largest election process for students at a university, it was very discouraging to see that at an institution, and I'm now speaking of 2020 or 2019, the end of 2019, the elections for 2020, at an institution where there are over 80,000 students, only 10,000 students then came to actually vote. And so amongst the youth, there is actually this reluctance to get involved in politics, get involved in social causes. And the major reason is because of corruption in South Africa. When students or when the youth see or hear politics, their immediate response is, I don't want to get involved because it's corrupt. So the immediate connotation or relation mentally that happens when people or members of the youth see politics is corruption. And it's unfortunate in that sense, because then social activities have then become a very important aspect of politics. So people think, or members of the youth think, that if I get involved in an activity that might uplift the community, I will have to join a political party, or I will have to be advancing an agenda of a political party. And so it is very discouraging for the youth to actually get involved in social development programs or programs and activities that contribute to the upliftment of the community. However, some major points in the youth's history of South Africa is probably, or is definitely, the Fees Must Fall movement of 2015, 2016, the Afrikaans Must Fall movement of 2017, the Am I Next protest that occurred towards the end of 2019, and it also had a bit of protests well into 2020, and I even see some slight protests or marches now and then around the Pretoria area. But to actually look at these three protests that I mentioned that are actually relevant to the youth of today in light of June 16, 1976, the protest of June 16 was a protest of the Bantu education system, which made Afrikaans a medium of instruction in schools. And that protest was actually a build-up, historians say it was a build-up of frustration that began from at least 1974. And that protest of June 16, 1976, it contributed largely to the freedom fight of South Africa ending apartheid. But more importantly, its contribution was so that today, and us as youth today, we went through the educational system without having Afrikaans as a medium of instruction, which is very important because when you look at the youth of 1976, it is actually our parents, it is actually members of the older community that we are very familiar with. Personally, my father was around the age of 12 so members of the youth at that time, and what they did during that time contributed to the life and to the privileges that I might now have in terms of education. So when we look at that, we actually see that when the youth stands together, when they agree on something, when we can fully commit ourselves to a cause, then we can actually see change. And it might not be immediately, but in the next generation and for the next generation, for our children, maybe 20 years from now, we will see that they do not live the lives that we had to live. My father or my parents and members that would have been the youth of 1976 are proud to see that their children today are going through the education system without having Afrikaans as a medium of instruction. And so we must ask ourselves, what are we doing today to ensure that the youth of tomorrow do not face the same struggles that we are facing today? And some of these struggles are obviously addressing corruption, which is it's happening everywhere. I think if we look at Google statistics, we would see that when South Africa is searched, the next popular thing that comes up is corruption, or the next thing that is suggested. There's obviously also gender-based violence. Last year, there were numerous articles that were saying that gender-based violence is probably a greater plague in South Africa than COVID-19. There's also the crime rates, and there's an entire list of problems that we have in South Africa that we as the youth can address and change. And this can really be achieved when we work together, when we agree, and when we understand that coming together and working together and speaking out, getting involved in activities, then contributes to social upliftment. To sort of narrow down and conclude, I always refer to Jay Lakhani because he is very much a role model of mine. And he mentions at numerous points in his discussions and in his lectures. And I also try to do this in my own research, in my master's, and now also in my PhD research, that over the years, Hinduism has actually been undermined. And when people look at it, Jay Lakhani says, when people look at Hinduism, they see it as a primitive, polytheistic religion that has no contribution to make to society, when in actual fact, Hinduism is simply making sense of the human condition. And so anyone then that seeks to make sense of their human condition and uses spirituality or uses the idea of a god or gods is then a Hindu. And many people responded to this definition of Hinduism by Jay Lakhani, saying that if that's the case, then if you believe in God, it doesn't matter which God, then you're actually abiding by Hindu faith. Because if you believe in God and you believe that everyone else's belief in God is just as valid, then you are a Hindu. And so a question that we as the youth need to ask ourselves is, how do we make sense of our reality? How do we understand our human condition in South Africa as Indians or as Hindus in South Africa, in light of the numerous texts and teachings that our ancestors have written for us over thousands of years? Hinduism is by far the oldest surviving religion. It extends well over 6,000 to 8,000 years, and its texts are enormous in size. Many people say, if you ask any of the other religions for their religious texts, they will hand you a book. But if you ask a Hindu, they will take you to an entire library. And that is the beauty of our tradition: different perspectives, different lessons, different teachings that allow us to understand God and understand ourselves as time progresses. So how then do we make sense of our human condition in South Africa in 2021 in light of Hindu teachings? And how does that then compel us to be actively involved in our community? How can we represent Hinduism and show to the world that Hindu texts, the Hindu philosophy, the Hindu religion is actually paving the way for a socially cohesive society. If we look at modern spirituality today, modern spirituality is being praised as the most cohesive and the most accepting religion. But modern spirituality is actually just a Western, in my opinion, it's actually just a Western sort of adaptation of Hindu philosophy, accepting different beliefs, accepting different interpretations of God and different religious beliefs, but understanding that there is just one God that exists within each of us. Another famous quote by Jay Lakhani that I'd like to just end with. He says that when we look at Hinduism and when we look at religion, people have this tendency to look out there, to look into the stars, to look at the cosmos and things like that, when in actuality, we need to look within ourselves. And when we go on a process of introspection, we find things within us that are far more vast than the entire universe. And so I would then encourage the youth to go on a process of self-inquiry, of self-exploration, of self-enlightenment in light of our Hindu teachings, and then you will find that as you undergo this journey, that you will feel compelled and you will feel like you want to contribute to a better society. And when you reach that moment, you will realize that all that we can actually do is just try to make the world a better place. Nandri, thank you.